Hi there everyone, I'm going to talk to you about a game called Mortal Kombat. It's a series that I've cared about for a long time. I've been playing Mortal Kombat since I was a little itty bitty baby, and maybe you'll care about Mortal Kombat as well. This video is focusing on the first entry, Mortal Kombat, the original one, but I'm going to go over the whole series. That's my plan. I've been thinking about doing this for a while, but now that the series is getting ready for a new entry this year in September, Mortal Kombat 1, I figured I would start making these videos and talk about why the series is important to me and maybe why it will be important to you. Now, you can probably find all this information elsewhere on YouTube, but this is the video I'm making, and if you want to stick around, you're welcome. So there's this game called Mortal Kombat. Now we're talking about the original, 1992, not to be confused with the game called Mortal Kombat that came out in 2011, that was the 9th game, and now also not to be confused with Mortal Kombat 1, which is coming out in 2023, but the 1992 version. It's a game that was published by Midway, rest in peace, Midway's dead, and it was released on home consoles by Acclaim, rest in peace, Acclaim's dead. It's a fighting game, which meant at the time you would be comparing it to Street Fighter II that came out just a year before. Now, I already said that I love Mortal Kombat, and if you know the series, you're probably thinking, Miles, you just like Mortal Kombat because you're a little freak and you like all the blood and gore and stuff, right? And to that I say, well, yeah, but also, fuck you, because I think that Mortal Kombat has a lot more going for it than just the blood and gore. So let's teleport back to when I was a child. Back when my brain was still developing, what's the first video game I ever saw? Well, actually, I think it was Super Mario Bros. 3 or some Roadrunner game or something, but except for that, one of my first real memories in my human brain is Mortal Kombat. I think I started with 2, and I remember sitting on the floor and spamming Sub-Zero's freeze move over and over again on my dad, pissing him off really bad. So I think I did start with Mortal Kombat 2, which meant that when my cousin wanted to play Mortal Kombat the original on the Sega Saturn, I was like, what is this bullshit? This looks like Pit Fighter or some garbage. And at a cursory glance it kind of does, because it's just digitized dudes swinging around. But if you look at Mortal Kombat closely, you'll see that a lot of the series' roots come from the very first game. But I really didn't get to appreciate the first Mortal Kombat. Most of my experience was buying or renting the SNES versions of Mortal Kombat, and I would occasionally see a cabinet and a Pizza Hut or something, but I was too young to remember the real boom of the arcade cabinet when Mortal Kombat got its start. So let's go back a tiny bit more to 1991, which was notable for two things. First of all, the boy was released. Blam. Second, development started on this new game called Mortal Kombat. The crew was pretty tiny. You know how a modern game can have like 100 people or more working on things? Well, you know how many people were on there for Mortal Kombat? There were 4 people. So you probably know Ed Boon. He was in charge of programming at the time. He was the boss. And John Tobias, he was a new employee at the time, but he was for art and story. Then there was John Vogel, who was in charge of the graphics, and Dan Forden for all the sounds. So the story goes that at first, Tobias and his team wanted to make like a ninja game. But Boone, who was the boss at Midway at the time, said, nah, that's stupid, don't do that. Then someone at Midway saw a poster for the movie Universal Soldier that was coming out next year, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. And so they saw stars in their eyes. They started slobbering all over themselves. We want you to make a game based on that. Licensed games sell like fucking hotcakes. So, after that, the team imagined a digitized version of Van Damme with a game similar in tone to another of his movies, Bloodsport. Unfortunately, Van Damme was busy at the time, and so the plan to include Van Damme never came to fruition. Until now. But even still, the character, Michael Grimm, was the first character completed, and he was put into the game as this martial artist turned movie star. Does that sound familiar? Well, that's because he's Johnny Cage. Yeah, they changed his name to Johnny Cage, which some people believe is the JC of Jean-Claude Van Damme. But look at this guy, he's shirtless, he even drops down, does the splits, and punches a guy in the dick. That's a direct reference to Bloodsport. This guy is Jean-Claude Van Damme. But I was fibbing to you earlier. 1991 also saw another thing that was notable. That was the release of Street Fighter II, and the success of Street Fighter II spurred Midway to let them continue making an arcade fighting game. That's what Tobias wanted to make, as it would allow them to use big old digitized sprites. But they didn't want to copy Street Fighter II's formula, and in fact, they really took more inspiration from titles like Karate Champ. So old man Midway strolled up and was like, "Make a fighting game, boys, make it in a year." And Boone and Tobias were like, "Aw, shit, we gotta compete with Street Fighter." But they did it. Allegedly, they managed to get the game done in 10 months, and with a budget of like $1 million. So there's been a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff about the digitization process that they used to put characters into Mortal Kombat, and it'd be pretty simple now, but at the time they were working with constraints like they had to fit every character into 8 megabytes. Everything was super duper limited. They had 64 colors, they had 300 frames to move around in, everything had to be chopped down and fit into 8 megabytes, so this was a tiny, tiny file size. What can you fit into 8 megabytes now, like patch notes or something? And also look at the name. Look at this kooky bullshit right here. This is a K, but you're thinking, hey, combat starts with a C, aren't you? I know you are. Well, yeah, the story goes that nobody could settle on a name. They were throwing around goofy 90s names like Kumite and Dragon Attack and Death Blow. They were throwing around all these bullshit names. Then one day they were just goofing around with the whiteboard and somebody put a K over the C and they were like, or maybe we're onto something here. Combat, that looks cool. And then Ed Boon says that Steve Ritchie is the one who suggested Mortal Kombat, and everybody liked it and it just stuck, and now we have Mortal Kombat today. Alright, so let's talk about playing this bad boy. The first Mortal Kombat was a 5-button game. That means that it had a high punch, a high kick, a low punch, a low kick, and a block button. In certain situations, you can throw your opponent, and for assholes, it has this sweep kick that knocks you on your ass over and over and over again. Mortal Kombat also had this uppercut that would blast people way up in the air, and for you in the know, like me, fighting game expert, you can juggle people. That means you can send them up in the air and then hit them for more damage while they're still up there in the air. So of course, this was an arcade game from back in the day, so there were no menus or that kind of stuff in the original version. To get into a versus match, you had to start the arcade ladder, which is the single player component, and then the second player can just join for a versus match. The winner of that match gets to continue the ladder playthrough. So back in the day, you could theoretically be out in public, having a good time, beating on the AI, when some punk kid with a mohawk comes up, puts his crusty old quarter in the machine, beats your ass, and then takes over your run. That would really suck. And look, those are supposed to be my initials up there. Now that kid just put the word ass up on the screen. Embarrassing. So you're probably not a dumbass. You know how ladders go in fighting games. In this one, there were only 7 characters, so you'd fight every character on the roster in one-on-one matches. Then finally there'd be a mirror match against yourself, and then 3 endurance matches, which meant that you had to fight against 2 opponents, which I guess was kind of unique. Then you fight against this big asshole Goro, who's a real motherfucker. And then Shang Tsung is the final boss of Mortal Kombat, the original. So this wrinkly old nutsack of a man is the ultimate badass, apparently. But the thing about Shang Tsung in this one is that he doesn't really have any of his own moves. He can just transform into any other character in the roster. So it's basically, you're fighting against the entire roster, potentially again. To break up the flow between fights, Mortal Kombat had a Test Your Might minigame. Street Fighter also had minigames where you would destroy a car or punch barrels or whatever, and Mortal Kombat had its own minigame. You just mash on the buttons super fucking fast so that you can punch above this line to score. It's just a game where you mash buttons and break stuff. You start with wood, and then stone, and steel, and then if you're in multiplayer you do ruby and also diamond. So a lot of people probably know how to do a Hadouken in Street Fighter. You do down forward plus punch. Well, Mortal Kombat had a couple of those moves, but most of Mortal Kombat's moves are weird double taps or like down-up motions, and the thing about these special moves was there was no handy move list like you'd find now. It was all experimentation, and you'd hear at recess that somebody like threw a fireball, and you'd be like, no fucking way, and then that would turn out to be true. And then sometimes you'd hear something like, somebody put in a code and they saw Liu Kang's naked dong, and that turned out not to be true. But probably Mortal Kombat's biggest initial hook was fatalities. They're an ultra-violent, at least for the time, move after the match is over that makes sure your opponent is dead. Not KO, not go home and be a family man. Dead. Except for Liu Kang, who was supposed to be like a good guy, Shaolin monk or whatever in the first one. They got rid of that. Anyway, they said initially that the focus wasn't really on violence and gore, but it kind of became the thing over the course of development. And yeah, duh, of course it did. Look at this shit. Sonya burns you to a skeleton, Johnny uppercuts your head off, you fall down into a pit of spikes, and Sub-Zero rips your head off with the spine still attached. This stuff is badass and cool, and for the 90s, it was unseen before. Now, Boone said that this was actually made in response to the dizzy state in Street Fighter. He hated the mechanic of being unable to move in the middle of a fight, but liked getting a free hit in after the outcome was already decided, kind of a cheap shot, and they went over the top with these things. Apparently it was just going to be the final boss. You were going to be able to uppercut Shang Tsung's head off, but they did the animation and then they're like, whoa, we should make everybody have this cool finishing move, and then they applied it to everyone. I'm glad they did. But there were definitely some people who were not glad that they did. The release of Mortal Kombat, along with other violent or otherwise mature games at the time, led to a lot of backlash from parents and politicians and stuff. There were all these hearings on video game violence and the corruption of society or whatever, and eventually this led to the ESRB being formed to make ratings for games and other entertainment software. I think it was a pretty goofy controversy overall. If we look at Night Trap and Doom and Mortal Kombat now, they're pretty tame, but I guess the ESRB does serve a purpose. Also, come to think of it, looking back at my art at the time, it was all heads on spikes and torn up bodies and stuff, so Mortal Kombat did have an effect on me, even though I don't think it made me violent. But despite all this negative backlash and controversy, this is what really boosted sales. Sort of like what people do now. If there's like something people want you to click on, they're like, oh, whatever you do, don't click on this link, it's disgusting, ew, you'll be grossed out for a week. And you'll be like, oh man, I gotta see what that's all about. What is this gross thing? Alright, so the arcade game was released in 1992 by Midway, but then a year later, on Mortal Monday, September 13th, 1993, Mortal Kombat was launched by Acclaim for home consoles. The Super Nintendo, the Genesis, and then also the Game Boy and the Game Gear. This was the commercial right here. You hear that? We're going to talk about that later in the series. So like I was saying, there were two home console releases, the SNES and the Genesis. The SNES had more arcade-accurate audio, but less precise controls, and also neutered violence. Look at these SNES fatalities and tell me those are as good. Also, they took out the blood and replaced it with, well, this white stuff here, which I can only assume is cum. They said that it's sweat, but I don't know nobody who sweats white.
Did you fall into some mud or something?
You could get the blood back if you had a Game Genie, which was a thing you plugged into your console and you could put codes into. The Genesis version had a code to turn the blood back on, and fun fact is that the code was ABA-CABB, which sounds like Abacab, and the band Genesis had an album called Abacab. Isn't that a fun fact? Isn't that interesting? Are you still watching? Alright then. There was a Game Boy version, I'm not really going to go into that. It was laggy and shitty. You could play as Goro, but that was about the only thing it had going for it. The Game Gear was apparently pretty good, but I also don't know much about that. I think there was missing some characters or something. There was a DOS version. The Sega CD version had a video intro of the Mortal Monday commercial. There were also Tiger Electronics little mini games of these things, which good luck finding one of those. I wouldn't recommend it. I've seen footage of them, but I've never seen one in real life. I don't think you should look for one. And then, actually, what you're looking at right now is the 2011 release called Mortal Kombat Arcade Collection. That's what I'm using right now. I have it on Steam. It's really hard to track down, though, because it was delisted. It was on the Xbox 360 and PS3. Luckily, I do have it on Steam, but it's kind of a trick to get, and it's hard to even get it running. You have to, like, push in some code because it was doing the Games for Windows Live thing. So it's a pain in the ass unless you have, like, Fightcade or something to play the original now. Alright, so now let's get into one of the reasons that I come back to the series over and over again, and why so many other people do too, the characters. After they gave up on using celebrities, the team went with local martial artists and stuff to portray the characters. The initial roster consists of 7 people. Liu Kang, who was portrayed by, is sort of the main protagonist. He's a Shaolin monk who the game describes as a former member of the White Lotus Society. Sonya Blade, who's played by Elizabeth Malecki, is a Special Forces agent pursuing a Black Dragon criminal named Kano. Kano is played by Richard DeVizio, and then there's the Thunder Guard Raiden, or Raiden if you're on console, who's played by Carlos Pesina. Then his brother Daniel Pesina plays Hollywood actor Johnny Cage, who we talked about before, along with the undead specter Scorpion, who is in the tournament to avenge his own death. That's all we know in this first one. Then he also plays Sub-Zero, because Sub-Zero is just a palette swap of Scorpion in this one. He's Scorpion's rival, and he's described as being from the Lin Kuei and having ice powers. That's about all we know in this game. There's also a palette swap called Reptile, who's a green one, and he's a secret character. He's a green ninja, and people could find him sometimes after meeting some very specific criteria. You'd have to go on a certain stage and wait for a shadow to fly over the moon and take no damage while also not blocking and perform a fatality and stand on one leg and eat a banana and call your grandma while also doing the Macarena and landing on the final pose where there are exactly 45 seconds left on the clock. It's a real gamer's challenge. Anyway, there's also Goro, which we talked about before. He's the only character which is not a digitized actor, but he's a stop-motion model, kind of like what they did for Primal Rage or some other shit like that. He's the sub-boss of the game, and like I said, he's the penultimate fight of the arcade ladder, kind of like Sagat from Street Fighter. He's four-armed Shokan, he's described as half-human and half-dragon beast, and he's a cheating fuck who can't be thrown. He'll also input read and counter you like an asshole, so he's a real pain in the ass to fight, no fun. Finally, Shang Tsung is the boss I said. He's portrayed by Ho Sung Pak, who did Liu Kang, and he's also portrayed by Eric Kincaid, but this isn't mentioned in the credits. In Mortal Kombat, he's a powerful sorcerer who can shapeshift into any other character in the game and use their moves. The characters are inspired mostly by Asian martial arts cinema, and also pretty undeniably by Big Trouble in Little China. Like, take a look here. Worth mentioning, I guess, are the stages which circle around Shang Tsung's island. There's the courtyard stage, and look at this fucker back here. This is actually John Vogel behind the mask. You've got your palace gates, your warrior shrine, you've got the pit, which was actually the first unacknowledged stage fatality. You could uppercut someone off of this into the pit bottom. You could fight someone on the pit bottom if you were fighting Reptile. Then there's this throne room here, and then you go to Goro's lair. So like I said, controversy wasn't the only thing that hooked people on Mortal Kombat. Yeah, the gore and violence was what people initially came for, but even from the first entry, Mortal Kombat was building up a rich lore. The story of the first game is told mostly through the arcade attract screen and through each character's ladder ending. The story in Mortal Kombat is that this old-ass, prestigious martial arts tournament, whatever, is going on, and then 500 years ago, these two dickheads step up and murder this great Kung Lao guy, and then he and Shang Tsung have been running shit ever since. That was about all you got for backstory for this one. So in canon, Liu Kang is the one who wins the tournament, but each character has their own kind of what-if, unique ending. There's mostly a single screen with text, which was standard procedure from the arcade at the time, but this is what they look like. As I said, Johnny Cage is kind of Van Damme, so he's this martial arts guy who's a movie star. When he wins, he learns the importance of his fighting skills, and he goes back to Hollywood to make the Mortal Kombat movie and its sequels. Kano's this asshole mercenary thug type. He lives a life of crime and injustice. Kano, being the dick that he is, takes over the tournament and brings it to anarchy. Sonya is like this special forces operative chasing Kano, and she accidentally ends up on Shang Tsung's island. Her team is captured, and she has to fight in the tournament, so in her ending, Sonya wins and frees everyone, and she beats Kano's clan, the Black Dragon, too. Sub-Zero is our blue ice ninja, and his identity is unknown, but actually he's Bi-Han in this one. Anyway, he's part of this ninja clan, the Lin Kuei. Now, this is kind of weird in his ending because it says that some rich fuck paid him off to kill Shang Tsung. He takes the money and pieces out. I'd really love to know who this was, but I don't think it's ever brought up again. Scorpion is our yellow ninja, and his intro is just as vague, but we know this dude is from an opposing clan and that he hates Sub-Zero because Sub-Zero murdered him. Yeah, that's right, Scorpion's already dead in the first one. So he gets to come back and kill Subby, but he gets like this Twilight Zone ending. He's like Spawn and Ghost Rider mixed together. He gets to come back, but he does not get to see his wife and child again. Raiden is called a thunder god that took the form of a human to compete in the tournament in this one. He received a personal invitation from Shang Tsung himself. I like Raiden's attitude in this one because he just gets bored. He's just like, fuck this is boring. And he starts a new fight and it destroys the world. And they say, have a nice day at the end here. That's pretty nice. And then there's Liu Kang. Liu Kang is a former member of the White Lotus Society, but he left to fight in the tournament. It says that this motherfucker hates Shang Tsung. When he wins, he drops the hosting duties back to his society, restoring the pride and respect of the tournament, and living happily ever after, I guess. I don't know if this was originally intended to be the canonical ending, but going forward in the series, this is the one that happened. This is the canon ending of the tournament. Liu Kang wins. And so that's pretty much what Mortal Kombat has to offer. So it may not look like much now, as technology and the gaming industry as a whole has grown a lot since 1992, but I think the original is still worth going back and looking at least for a few minutes, just for historical appreciation. No, you don't have to go pro and try getting this on the main stage at EVO or anything, but just play around with it, have some fun. By today's standards, it's not a great game. It's kind of janky and doesn't have much in the way of progression and unlockables, but this was the shit back in its day. I'm not going to give it a score exactly, but I will keep a running list of the series and maybe I'll rank them. So, as of right now, Mortal Kombat 1992 is the #1 game, the best I've played so far. And then all the way down at the bottom of the list, we'll find Mortal Kombat 1992. Check back next time as I continue through the series with Mortal Kombat 2. If you're into this sort of thing, do the YouTube stuff if you want to, like and subscribe and all that. I'm gonna see about maybe keeping up with my channel and posting on a more regular basis. That'd be kinda neat, I think. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you next time.